Chrissy, I thought we might talk about homestead exemption for a few minutes because it's confusing and people might find this interesting, at least the part we're going to talk about. But let's first of all say there are two homestead exemptions. The first one has to do with our Florida Constitution, which says that here in the state of Florida, no creditor may take away the home of an individual or place a lien against their home. That's the Florida Constitutional Homestead Exemption. That's not the one I want to talk about. I want to talk about the homestead exemption that has to do with your annual real estate tax bill.
Yes.
Here in the state of Florida, if you've applied for a homestead exemption, you live in that home, and your homestead exemption has been granted to you, they will knock $50,000 off the assessed value of your home, and that will save you about $750 a year in real estate taxes.
Correct.
But for homestead exemption, for real estate tax purposes, there may be even a more important, valuable part to the real estate taxes homestead exemption, and that is this, is that if it's your homestead, the property appraiser's office cannot raise the assessed value of your home by more than 3% in any 1 year. So when you think about when we've had these real estate booms in the state of Florida, if it's your homestead, they cannot raise your assessed value by more than 3%.
Right.
If it's your rental property or your vacation beach condo, they can do whatever they want to. And if you're paying real estate taxes on a piece of vacation property or your beach condo or your commercial property, you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
Okay? And by the way, I've been at club meetings before where the property appraiser's office has come to me, our club, and said, we've never raised the millage rate, the rate we tax your property. We've never raised it before. I'm thinking, okay, well, all you do is you raise the assessed value every year. You're still taking more of our money.
That's exactly right. Exactly.
Okay, so
They say they didn't raise the millage, but it doesn't matter. Again, it's still significantly more.
So what does that mean for people who've lived and owned their homes for a long time like you and me? It means that our real estate tax bill is artificially low. Good for us, all right? If you moved to the state of Florida and you bought a $2 million home, you can get homestead exemption. They'll knock $750 a year off your real estate tax bill, but they're going to tax you based on the value of a $2 million home. And guess what? Real estate taxes on a $2 million home are right around $30,000 a year.
Right.
We don't live in a $2 million home, but there are people out there that are living in a $2 million home that because they've lived there forever and ever, their real estate tax bill might be $7,000 or $8,000 a year because of this 3% cap. Okay, we're talking about homestead exemption for real estate tax purposes. The nice thing about that homestead exemption for real estate tax purposes is that it is portable. You and I have lived in our home for a long, long time. We have artificially low real estate taxes. If we bought another home, we could take our artificially low exemption and move it to another piece of property. And it's not because we're special. This is just anybody that lives in the state of Florida that has a homestead exemption.
Exactly. So at least, and I think that's a great comparison when you gave this, so a value of a $2 million home where somebody has lived there for a long time, their taxes may be around $7,000, where somebody that's just moving to Florida, buying that $2 million home, it would be approximately $30,000, and that's really important. But also for the listeners to understand, and I'm sure most are aware of this already, so even though you say, oh, wow, okay, Florida's really gouging you, but also at the same time, there's no state income tax.
This is exactly right.
This is the way they make revenue.
So I want to say some more things about that. If mom or dad have owned a homestead for a long, long time, their real estate tax bill is artificially low because of the 3% cap. When they pass away and the home goes to the kids, that exemption's gone. The county will reassess the value as to the current value of the property, and kids' real estate taxes are going to go way up.
And now you're starting at
Really, you're up there where you should be if you were just a brand new buyer. So that's a lot of kids are disappointed when they learn that fact.
Well, I think that's a very significant thing when we do estate planning consultations, this is an important piece of the conversation, because you are correct that many people are not accurate information. They think that their kids will be able to continue that same low rate, and that is not accurate.
Not the case.
The minute, as a matter of fact, that any deed changes to new owners, no matter what the circumstance, whether they're kids or relatives or strangers, it now starts it back over.
Now, most of the time when mom and dad pass away, the kids turn right around and sell the home. So
it's not an issue.
What the real estate tax bill is doesn't matter.
Correct.
But when they sell the home, by the way, they get another step-up basis for capital gains taxes. They can avoid capital gains taxes,
Exactly.
but we're talking about real estate taxes.
Correct. You're talking about the homestead exemption and real estate taxes on the property, and different. And there's an addition too, which is the capital gains.
Yeah.
So again, they're different things. And then really, when you think about it as well, probate could be considered to be like a tax, if you will. I mean, a lot of times people think of it that way. And this is how we are having a conversation to explain each of these different aspects of it to our clients.
So with that said, I had a client last week where the home was in the husband's name only. He wants to add the wife's name to the property. He's owned the home forever and ever. He's got an artificially low real estate tax bill because of the 3% cap of increasing the valuation. And he wanted to make sure that if he adds his wife's name, he doesn't lose that. So I called the exemptions office and talked to somebody, and they sounded very knowledgeable, like they knew they were very clear what I was asking and very clear what their answer was. And I said, okay, if we add the wife's name to the deed while the husband's still alive, he signs this deed, and now the husband and wife own this property together, is that going to reset his taxes or affect the amount of his real estate tax bill? And they assured me the answer was no. No.
1 minute.
Yeah. So that I want to let you know that I did talk to somebody, ask that specific question. I feel certain they understood what I was asking. Their answer to me was very clear. So assuming that the property at the Homestead Exemptions office knew what they were talking about, the good news, we could add the wife's name to the deed, and they would have to reapply for homestead exemption. Whenever you mess with a title, you got to reapply, but their exemption, their tax bill would not change.
Correct. And it's important, thank you for that information and for listeners to know, and the fact that you took the next step and had that conversation with the property appraiser. And what it means is there's a value, if you will, of adding the spouse without the concern that the taxes will increase.
Got it. Holly, before you read this text to me, I'm going to bring you up to speed, okay?
Okay.
So last week I had a married couple come to me, and the homestead is in the husband's name only. He has lived there for a long time, and because of the homestead exemption, there's a 3% cap. They cannot raise the assessed value by more than 3% in any 1 year. Because he's lived there for a long time, the assessed value of his home is artificially low. Therefore, his real estate tax bill is artificially low. Good for him. Good for anybody that's lived in their home and in Florida for a long time. His question to me was, Tom, if I add my wife's name, I know that I'm going to have to reapply for homestead exemption next year, because whenever you mess with a title, you got to reapply for homestead exemption. I want to make sure that they don't reset my real estate appraisal assessed value. So I called the homestead exemptions. I clearly explained to them what I wanted to do. I believe they clearly understood what I was asking. They clearly said, no, if you add the wife's name to the deed, you will have to reapply for homestead exemption, but you're going to keep your great low assessed tax value.
Right.
So there's like part one.
Okay.
So here's a very smart texter who wants to know the answer to part two. So go ahead and read that for us.
So this is a two-part question. The first part of the texter's question is, by adding spouse to homestead exemption before their death, does that avoid resetting homestead for the surviving individual?
Let's stop right there. So what he's saying is, okay, let's just say that the wife that I'm adding the wife's name to the deed, let's just say she's a younger woman, okay? We know that by adding the wife's name to the deed, it's not going to reset the assessed value next year, 2025.
Mm-hmm.
The question is when husband passes away, are they going to reset it then, because the wife has not been an owner for all the years that the husband was an owner? Inquiring minds want to know.
Mm-hmm.
And guess what? I don't know the answer to that. I would call that a technical question. I find it a fascinating question.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the answer to that question. If I were to call the tax assessor's office and ask them the answer to that question, I'm not so sure they could give me a correct answer to it. I might try and ask it anyway, but I find that fascinating.
Absolutely. And as I go through the Rolodex in my head, I know we've had clients before who've come to us recently widowed, and it turns out that perhaps the surviving spouse was definitely added on a few years earlier in a quitclaim deed because we're going to do some estate planning. So it would be interesting to find out if their value was reassessed.
Yeah. Well, part 2 to this texter's question was, okay, well, if that's going to work, how about if my son lives with me and he's much younger than me? How about if I add my son's name to the deed? It's his homestead too. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he can take my artificially low assessed value and stretch it out for another 20 or 30 years.
Right.
Got my doubts about
On that one.
Okay. Because as said with Chrissy earlier in the show, Florida does not have income taxes.
Correct.
This is how one of the ways state of Florida raises money to pay for everything going on in the state of Florida. So they're not, yes, they'll give you this artificially low exemption, but they're going to look for opportunities to try and take it away from you too.
Absolutely.
So I'll give you an example of that. I've had married couples before that came to me and said, Tom, we own a home in Orlando. We got a beach condo over at the beach. And I take a homestead exemption on an Orlando home. My wife takes a homestead exemption on our beach condo.
No.
No
Big
way.
no-no.
They're cross-checking counties to make sure you're doing that. I've had people that say, Tom, I've got a home in New York. We got a home in Florida. We're taking a homestead exemption in New York. We're taking a homestead exemption in Florida. No, they're cross-checking.
Mm-hmm.
And they've went for homestead exemption purposes. They will go so far to confirm that the electric bill is in your name.
Right.
If the electric bill is not in your name, that's a tip-off. If the real estate tax bill is not being mailed to the address of the property, that's a tip-off.
Mm-hmm.
So what am I saying? I'm saying they're looking for people who are claiming homestead exemption that are not entitled to it. In fact, if you go to the appraiser's website, you're going to find a little box there that says, is one of your neighbors claiming homestead exemption and you don't think they're entitled to it? Click this button.
Yeah.
Turn in your neighbor.
Turn in your neighbor. We had a quick question there.
I want to say one more thing about it, okay?
Yes.
Way, 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 way back in the day, there was a homestead exemption that was given to anybody that lived in the state of Florida for more than 5 years, okay? For real estate tax savings purposes. Some very smart lawyer went to court and challenged that and said, you can't do that. You can't discriminate against people that... And I can see the theory for it was because, okay, if I've lived here for more than 5 years, I paid my share for the new roads and the new sewer systems and so forth. It's the new people coming into Florida. They should be paying for these new infrastructures. I'm sure that was a rationale
behind
but
it.
the lawyer went to court, challenged it. It was lost, but now we've got the new type of homestead exemption. So, all right, let's move on to the next text, Holly.
So the next text was asking, you might want to discuss multiple owners and how to word this in the deed, joint tenants versus tenants in common, and how this affects who can claim homestead.
Okay.
And that's a multi-layered question there.
Well, good for them, for people
for
getting
thinking.
this, okay?
Yeah.
So, if you have 3 owners and only one of them lives in the home, 2 others have other homes, 2 others have other homes that they're claiming homestead exemption. If those 3 owners own that property as joint tenants with rights of survivorship, magic words, it would allow the one person that lives in there to claim the full homestead exemption. If the three owners have just the three names, period, or the three names tenants in common, then the one person that's living in the home can claim a one-third homestead exemption. Get one-third the benefits. If a homestead exemption saves you $750 a year in real estate taxes, it will save them $250 a year in real estate taxes. If your annual cap you've got a 3% annual cap in a appraised value, assessed value, then they will only get a 1% annual cap of assessed value. So good for this texter understanding the consequences there.
Exactly.
I just today I'm working on a deed where mom wants to add her two sons to the home name to the deed to her home. They got some very good reasons for it.
Okay.
And we set that deed up, joint tenants rights of survivorship. So that, and by the way, the two sons live there. So we really did that for the purposes of avoiding probate, but that will also get them a full homestead exemption. Whew. Yeah. Everything you thought you wanted to know about homestead exemption for real estate tax savings purposes in the state of Florida.
Wonderful segment.
I think it's fascinating. I hope the listeners appreciate it as well. Hey, folks, my name is Tom Olsen. Thank you so much for all your great calls and questions. I do so much appreciate it.